Are you looking to scale up your healthcare solution in partnership with leading healthcare companies such as Anthem, Chicago Pacific Founders, Evernorth, and United Health Group, with over 200 million members? Applications are open for the 2021 UCSF Rosamond Adapt program. Startups developing breakthrough technologies that improve healthcare efficiency will receive $100,000 cash support and connections to payers. To apply, please visit rosamondinstitute.org. And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosamond Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Our guest today is Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures and co-founder of Sun Microsystems. Vinod is an entrepreneur, investor, and technologist, as well as a mentor to entrepreneurs building technology-based businesses. In this episode, Vinod discusses the differences between the practice of medicine and the science of medicine. We also explore the value of exercising two extremes, hubris and paranoia. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Vinod. Thanks for joining me today. It's been my pleasure to finally have the opportunity to have you on our podcast.
Well, it's great to be here. So I love talking about these important topics.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. And I thought it would be good for you to share a little bit about your background. And I love reading your bio where you start saying that on your bio is you started with, you failed to start a soy milk company. And because there are many people who don't have a refrigerator in India when you started it. Can you share with us your personal background and how you are so hard set on wanting to become an entrepreneur and achieve that goal?
Well, here's what I would say to all the aspiring entrepreneurs. Most people I know are limited by what they think they can do, not by what they can actually do. So I always tell people, go for ambitious goals. And it's better to try and fail than fail to try. The person who fails to try an ambitious goal failed for sure. The person who will take a high-risk project has an opportunity to succeed, a probability at least of succeeding. So it's very important to have culturally the right attitude. The second thing I would say is look at a problem, whatever it is that you're passionate about, and try and solve it. Soy milk was a particular problem I had, so I decided to try and do something about it. It didn't work out, but that didn't deter me from doing other entrepreneurial efforts. So it's important to have passion for a vision. That's pretty important. And the last thing, not all hard things are valuable, but most valuable things are hard. Mm-hmm. So my advice to entrepreneurs is don't be deterred just because something is hard. It's probably the only reason it's an unsolved problem is because it's hard, and there's real reward to solving hard problems, and it can be done. It takes the right cultural approach. It takes a lot of persistence. Entrepreneurship is a little roller coaster where the highs are really high and the lows are really low. So one has to realize that and not give up during the lows. So it takes persistence, and what helps there is this passion for a vision I talked about. So that's my overall advice to entrepreneurs. The other thing I would say is too many people in the world believe what is not possible. And I always say skeptics never did the impossible. And you should keep that in mind when you're looking at hard problems. The other thing to keep in mind is almost no major innovation came from people who were really well versed in a domain. So, if you look at Airbnb, it wasn't Hilton and Hyatt who invented a new form of hoteling. Mm-hmm. Or if you look at Uber, nobody from Avis or Hertz thought about it. You'd think it's obvious for them. If you look at media, it wasn't CBS or Fox that reinvented media. It was companies like Twitter and Facebook and Netflix and YouTube that didn't even know they were in the media business. So I encourage people to take an entrepreneurial approach to large, hard problems. Mm-hmm. And assemble the right teams. We can come back and talk about it if you like. But it's important to not be deterred. It's having passion and clarity about a large problem and then do a lot of learning.
Yeah. So, and then I think, what the experience that you have a lot of the passion, and sometimes there's a point that you stop and pursue something else. And it's something that you've done, obviously, with your soy milk company, because you're not in the soy milk business, at least now. And what make you think that that is the right moment for you to stop and pursue something else?
Well, this question of when to give up, when to pivot, or change what you're doing, those are hard questions. They're specific to each situation. But in addition to passion for a vision and I would say almost premature confidence and hubris, which it takes to create something large, it's also very important to have a real paranoia. So to be constantly questioning yourself and every assumption you've made. So Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, wrote a book a long, long time ago in the 80s called Only the Paranoid Survive. So it's this schizophrenic personality about passion for a vision, overconfidence, even hubris, and paranoia at the other end, and always questioning every assumption you make. So it's the great entrepreneurs who have this sort of combination, who are always questioning themselves. They'll arrive at the right time if they're pragmatic and not fooling themselves. So it's okay to have overconfidence. It's okay to do ambitious things, but it's not okay to be blind to reality. So this constant questioning of your assumptions helps you decide when to give up or when to change something slightly. Those things are pretty important.
So yeah, and then obviously you've done a lot. You start the entrepreneur route, and then you started Sun Microsystems, and then in 2004 you started the Khosla Ventures. And maybe you can share with us a little bit about your Khosla Ventures overall thesis and what the social impact that you're trying to achieve through the Khosla Ventures.
Well, so Khosla Ventures was started to do a class of venture capital that involved more risk, to increase the level of risk we take, and to go less after a certain multiple of our investment, which is sort of the way venture firms usually operate, but to say what are the really large problems to be solved. If the problem is large and there's a plausible team and a plausible approach to it, then it's worth taking large risks. So we will generally take larger risks than most people in what we do because it's a class of projects that don't often get funded by others. So, and hopefully that has very large social impact, but also solves, because of solving a large problem, they also are very, very profitable, large, impactful businesses. So that's sort of our specific goal.
When you say you are taking more risk compared to other ventures, what is that? Means that you're going in earlier when there's more less of something put together, more like an early concept prototype?
Well, we'll take all kinds of risks. So when we started Impossible Food, there was only one lone entrepreneur with an idea, not really a prototype or a plan or anything. It just, I want to work on that problem, but it was a stellar entrepreneur. So each one is different. We have another project in healthcare where we're trying to say, can you do surgery very differently? So we are designing a microbot about the size of a human hair that you can introduce into the body untethered, navigate it to a location, say in your brain or spine, through your cerebrospinal fluid, and have it do a task.
And so for the latter, like the first one, like it's a concept because you believe in the entrepreneur, but the second project, what part of it that make it riskier than other investment? Is it because
because technically nobody's ever done anything like this before, other than in science fiction, and there was a lot of problems to be solved. You know, to deliver a medication or take a biopsy sample in your spine internally, can you navigate it from the outside? Can you return it back out? So there was a lot of technical issues.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So obviously you, Khosla Venture invested in healthcare as well. And as everybody's been saying how broken the U.S. healthcare system is in the U.S. And how do you think Khosla Ventures participation or way of trying to maybe problem solve our healthcare system here in the U.S. And I feel like everybody who are passionate about in healthcare is because they're trying to find a way how we can improve access so that more people in the U.S. can have access to good quality care.
Well, so there's many, many different kinds of efforts, right, in healthcare. At every level, healthcare has gotten much better over time, but I would submit healthcare is still the practice of medicine, not the science of medicine. Very few of the recommendations are science-based. Of the most important cardiac recommendations from the American College of Cardiology, less than 11% of them have what they consider Class A evidence. So it's really not evidence-based medicine. The same is true in almost all areas. And what the opportunity exists is to reinvent the practice of medicine as the science of medicine. And that I find pretty exciting. Within that, there's a number of areas to talk about. There's your basic physician-patient interface. So how do you do that? We can come back and talk about the patient-doctor relationship and how to solve that. There's chronic diseases, which are very, very expensive. How will they change radically? That's another question. Then are there new measurement techniques, better biomarker measurement? That's a whole different field of innovation. And then there's how do you do drug discovery? That's changing pretty dramatically. I would venture to guess the practice in all these areas, not just one, will change very, very dramatically over the next 10 or 15 years. And that creates a really large opportunity for entrepreneurs. There's other parts of medicine like health and fitness that haven't been addressed adequately. It's a lot of hand waving, not a lot of science. So I could go on and on. I'm happy to talk about any of these areas.
Yeah, let's tackle one at a time. You mentioned about patient and physician interface. What do you think? The pandemic have introduced us to something that's new. Especially people were surprised about how helpful the telehealth can be. What do you think the trend, and what do you think need to change in order to improve that engagement?
So it's important to say there's minor innovations in healthcare, and then there's major innovations in healthcare. I'm more interested in the major innovations, which generally involve more risk taking. But take the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, a year, 15 months ago, if you asked a physician, can you do your visit as a televisit? About 10% would say yes, and 90% would say no, it's not as good. Today, that number is flipped to 90% will say yes, most visits can be done televisit. But to me, that's what I call a very minor innovation, because you still need the same physician, you need the same communications, but we are really just putting them on Zoom. Nothing radical. We've had teleconferencing for 20 years, and you can package it to include HIPAA and other security and medical specific things, but I wouldn't call that a real technical innovation. It's a business process innovation, but the biggest thing is change in the mindset of healthcare providers. And that'll improve efficiency some and reduce the cost, but not in a major way. Now, what would be a major version of that? If an AI was doing the conversation with the patient and doing most of the diagnosis. Now, legally, you still need a healthcare a physician at the end to make a prescription or a diagnosis, but an AI can give health advice legally. And a few companies like Curai are taking that kind of approach of truly using breakthrough technology to say we don't need a physician 80% of the time. We can copy that expertise. Now, it has other very large advantages. For example, there's no primary care system that has the key characteristics the Institute of Medicine would define as very good primary care. First, most care isn't longitudinal. Most care doesn't include simple things like gaps in care. A physician in a hurried session over telesession doesn't remember to say, oh, you're 50 years old, you haven't had a colonoscopy in 2 years, you should get one. Those gaps in care are very important. But again, physicians can't give nutrition advice. They have to find a nutritionist, which makes it inaccessible. And nutrition is key to health. The same thing on fitness. Or then you get into, I have diabetes and I have osteoporosis. How do I manage those two conditions together? And when complexity of a patient increases, the physicians get totally lost because they're specialized. So there's all those problems that an AI could solve, delivered through a primary care physician as the integrator of medical needs. Most people take supplements in this country, but no physician knows how to advise on supplements really well. They might be able to tell you, yeah, go take iron, but they wouldn't tell you which particular form of iron may help the most if you have a tolerance problem. And if you have a tolerance problem, you won't adhere to that medication. Behavioral medicine is missing. All these things AI can do. Then there's sort of the additional question of how you do these chronic conditions like diabetes or mental health or others. And they're very, very expensive. But if they're done by humans, they will stay expensive. So if you want to cut the cost by an order of magnitude, bend, as I say, the cost curve, and at the same time, you want to improve the quality of care, AI has to play an integral part, and telehealth has to play a large part. Now, the fundamental notion, everybody loves telehealth. I think there's a fundamental problem. If you have a televisit, you'll never have an AI system that's learning. And the key to a good system is AI learning system. But I do believe all these vertical efforts, like Ginger and Lyra in mental health, Sword and Hinge in musculoskeleton, AliveCore in cardiac, Livongo and HelloHeart in hypertension, will reduce the cost. And among these, the companies that use AI well will also change the cost curve of care. So it makes a very big difference what approach you take. I fundamentally think people doing telehealth are limited in the improvements they can offer over 5 years. But as these vertical diseases get combined with, as separate services, get combined with the right kind of primary care, you're going to see a hollowing out of the profit centers of traditional provider networks because they make a lot of money in these verticals. And it's where the expense lies. Primary care can be much more comprehensive and include many of the chronic care advice because it's coming from an AI. A human being, hard to keep that much knowledge in your head and your expertise up to date. So in this domain, I think this system hollows out the old system, and without convincing a traditional provider to change, what they'll be doing is taking the profit away, and then the traditional providers will have to integrate into these kinds of services and fundamentally change the cost curve while improving the quality of care in all these areas.
So do you think, with the AI, there's a lot of talk about that. And I think that makes total sense about how, AI have the ability to remember more in their system than what a human brain can. And having the help of AI can improve so much of the efficiency. It took a pandemic before we flipped the mindset about, we can see our doctor virtually. What does it take for an AI to be able to kind of make that major change in healthcare?
I don't think it takes a lot. First, I would argue it didn't take a pandemic. It was already happening. The pandemic significantly accelerated it out of creating the necessity for telecare because there was no other alternative.
Right.
But my view is it would have happened anyway. It would have taken longer. You know, what AI has to do is expand the level of care, and it's the opportunity for entrepreneurs. How do you use AI to dramatically reduce the cost of care? Uh, Sword Health is already doing it in musculoskeletal care.
Is there other companies that you think of has implemented the AI?
Well, yeah, so Sword has done it in musculoskeletal very dramatically. Their cost of care is lower. Their efficacy is higher than human-based systems. Lifeco is doing it in cardiac care. Cura is doing it in primary care. All these are happening. In the end, the patient needs a set of services delivered well.
Right.
Where AI can help is make them higher quality, more comprehensive, broader, and lower cost. The patient doesn't care about the lower cost. The provider, the payer cares about the lower cost. The patient cares about better service. The physician cares about more comprehensive care for the patient. So each one has a different agenda,
right,
but they all work, and it is working.
So oftentimes when, like you say, machine learning, they need to do a lot of learning in order to come up with the good data sets. And how do you differentiate one company over the other that has a better data set, better algorithm that make it help?
Well, that's our job. It's hard to define one rule. Each company is different. And pharmaceutical drug discovery, data means something very different than what it does in diagnosing a disease.
Right.
Now, I will say much of the data in traditional health records is largely irrelevant to AI. So people say, hey, my EHR data is valuable. I find it's not very valuable. Most really clever companies are finding new ways to generate data that is more appropriately set up for AI learning.
So it's almost better if you're setting up something, you start your data collection using with the mindset how that it can be how it can support an AI rather than using the existing legacy data. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, legacy data can help sometimes, but only in minor ways.
Okay. So we covered a little bit about the physician-patient engagement in a chronic disease. And I think the third area that you mentioned is about the marker, how that is going to transform healthcare.
So two large things are happening in how you diagnose disease. And we can come back to the overall goal of a system where the goal should be to eliminate the need for symptoms in disease. So we mostly have symptom-based medicine today, not diagnostic biomarkers. Those come later, and that's a shame. But let's look at measurement. If you look at new systems, one can dramatically change the cost of these diagnostics and do it differently. Let me give you two examples. OpenTrons took the COVID test, a standard PCR test, and fully automated it. So they are now offering at dramatically lower prices, well below $30. A COVID test that LabCorp and Quest charge $150 for, or $100 for. So the cost of care goes down while the accuracy and consistency goes up, and they need less training because they don't have operators running every PCR test. But what comes next is even more exciting. The way to go from a single COVID test to 20 respiratory diseases in a PCR test is zero, practical purposes, zero incremental cost. It's so small a cost increment. One can offer not only COVID, but a 20 respiratory panel at an order of magnitude cheaper price than a LabCorp request might charge. That's innovation, but that's changing the testing process without innovating on the test. Another example is a company called Genelite. If you're in a primary care office, the doctor meets with you, they'll say, oh, check your hemoglobin or check your PSA. You will then, a week later, go to LabCorp request, get a blood draw, and then 2 weeks later, get your result, and maybe the doctor remembers to call you back or not. Very expensive process, very inconvenient for the patient. The doctor has to spend twice the amount of time because he doesn't have the data in front of him. Genelite takes a different approach. You walk into a doctor's office, they do every test the doctor might order. They actually target to do about 85% of all the tests a doctor may order before the doctor orders. Because, again, it's so cheap. Then if the doctor says he needs your iron, he gets it instantaneously while they're meeting with you. And he says, oh, your iron's okay. I need to check something else. Your TSH. It's there immediately. So you save a lot of visits. You get real data in the conversation, diagnosis based on real data. But it comes from the fact that the cost of doing one test or 50 is the same because the kind of technology approach Genelite is taking. So the consult with the doctor will be much more comprehensive. So those are different approaches to existing testing. There are other companies that are coming with whole new testing. Like, can you do 10,000 biomarkers per blood sample at cost-effective cost points? Or can you do an epigenetic test, which is not normally prescribed? Whole genome epigenetics will be dirt cheap in 5 years. It's a major area to innovate in. It's not something used in practice today. It's inventing something new. We've already discovered epigenetic markers are key to cancer and cancer treatment. But we'll discover that about every disease from diabetes to Alzheimer's to sarcopenia. You pick your favorite disease. So I think that's another area we will see large revolutions, both in the existing techniques and what might be brand new techniques, brand new biomarkers.
So it's all actually what you're just saying is all interconnected. At the end of the day, it's improving the patient-physician engagement because you equip the physician with the right information when they engage with the patient rather than trying to interview the patient every time they meet them.
Yeah.
With their symptoms, condition.
So I think what we are seeing is a real revolution, and it comes from, medicine has benefited a lot from biology and will continue to benefit from biology. But when you add new sensing techniques like laser sensing, new sequencing, I think the cost of sequencing with companies like Ultima will go down to $10 or $20 per full human genome sequencing. When that happens, it can be used in clinical medicine as a routine play. If you need a blood thinner, the first thing you should do is say, what's your genetics? how well does Plavix work on you? We don't do that, and we should be doing that. So these new things will change the practice of medicine. Epigenetics added on top of that will dramatically change medicine. So I do think we will see all that happen very radically. But my point is, in addition to biology, even more uh, help is being provided by computational techniques, by AI techniques, by new kinds of sensors that these genomics companies or epigenetic companies or Genelite like companies are using, or robotics and automation that OpenTron's using. The axes of innovation have gone through the roof. Mm-hmm. So I'm much more optimistic about the rate of innovation dramatically accelerating, which is good news for all your entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, that's good. And it's good news for all of us because we can benefit as a patient with a better,
yes,
better care for us. And I know I'm short on time, but I thought it would be good to get the last closing question from you. Is I know you briefly mentioned in the beginning about your advice to the entrepreneurs, but maybe if you can share with us your 3 lessons learned in life that you can share your wisdom with us.
Yeah. Here's what I would say. A few things I would point in closing. It's easy to follow. It's hard to lead. To lead in a new area, you have to have a belief system, some guiding principle, and a passion for a vision you want to make happen. Right? And it's scary because nobody's done it before. You're doing something new. And so you want this change in practice. And it takes courage to lead. It's scary to lead because usually leadership happens when others are afraid and it's ambiguous. So leadership and having a belief system and a passion for the vision you're trying to make happen is very valuable, and it'll help when things go wrong because there's no startup that has a linear path. Mm-hmm. The next best lesson I would tell people is it's the great technology breakthroughs, which often happen in healthcare, are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And many healthcare entrepreneurs don't realize what else you need to make a company or a vision successful. I always say there's a dramatic difference between a $0 million company and a $0 billion company, even though they have zero in revenue. One has a different mindset than the other about the kind of team that's needed to build a company. So I would say think about the team you're assembling as much as the technology breakthrough you're creating. And it's the hardest thing because most entrepreneurs are specialists in some technical area, but they haven't thought about ever what it takes to market something, monetize something, sell something, what's the real needs. And so their intuitive judgments about the kind of team they need are usually not very good, and one mistake can kill a company. Mm-hmm. I've seen that happen very often, and this is where the right investor can really help you. I always say the team you build is the company you build, not the plan you make. Because plans can change, but teams are much harder to change. Right. The last thing I would say is cultural. You both have to learn how to execute, but also explore. Especially when you're going after very innovative ideas. There's a lot of ambiguity. And so executing on the wrong plan will get you to the wrong place. So pivots, iterations of your strategy, minor adjustments, major adjustments, those are all part of the process of building a successful company. Mm-hmm. And every good team, and there are exceptions, but very few, should think of both exploration as well as execution and balance the two. And while doing the exploration, be on a learning path. The single most important thing an entrepreneur does in the first few years of starting a company is increase their rate of learning in a way where if they fail at something, it's not catastrophic failure, but learning is maximized from failure. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't kill the company, but they optimize for rate of learning, not execution alone. So those are cultural factors. Those would be some of the important ones.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing your three most important lessons for the entrepreneur to take on. And thank you for your time.
Well, great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, our content writer, Kelly Muscat, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.